He laughed. Not the quiet laugh of a man sharing a private moment. It was the kind of laugh that fills a room, loose, careless, the laugh of someone who believes they are completely alone and completely safe. Nia Okafor stood frozen in the hallway outside her own bedroom door, rain still dripping from her coat onto the marble floor, her birthday surprise dinner growing cold in the bag she'd carried up 43 floors. Her husband's voice cut through the wall like a blade. She suffocates me. 7 years of that woman hovering, worrying, loving me like I'm something that needs to be saved. It's exhausting. Then her cousin's laughter. Sabrina. The only family she had left in this city. So why did you marry her? Biggest mistake of my life. Nia's hand found the wall. She didn't move. She couldn't. She just stood there, in the home she had poured herself into for 7 years, listening to the two people she loved most in this world dismantle her like she was nothing. If you've ever loved someone so completely that you forgot to protect yourself, this story is for you. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels, and if it moves you, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Now let's go back to the beginning, because to understand the night Nia Okafor walked away from everything, you need to understand exactly what she had survived to get there. 7 years is a long time to love someone who is slowly becoming a stranger. Nia didn't fall in love with Jae Hyun Kang the way people do in movies, slowly, sweetly, with soft music and perfect timing. She fell in love with him the way real people do, messily, inconveniently, against every reasonable warning her mind tried to send her. She was 26 when they met. She was working as a cultural liaison for an international trade firm in Seoul, one of only 3 black women in a company of 240 employees, a fact that was never far from anyone's awareness in that office, even when nobody said it out loud. She had learned to carry herself in a way that left no room for doubt. Shoulders back, voice steady, never the first to blink. She was good at her job, not because the work came easily, but because she had learned to read rooms the way other people read books. She could walk into a meeting, absorb the temperature of every person in it, and know within 60 seconds who needed to be convinced, who needed to be flattered, and who needed to be ignored completely. It was a skill she had developed young, growing up as the eldest daughter of a single mother in Atlanta who worked 3 jobs and still came home with enough energy to make sure Nia knew she was worth more than whatever room she was standing in. Her mother died when Nia was 24. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed late, progressed fast. Nia had taken a leave of absence from her job and moved home for the last 4 months. She had bathed her mother, managed her medications, read to her when the pain made it impossible to sleep. She had held her hand on the last night and made promises she was still trying to keep. 2 years later, she was in Seoul, trying to rebuild herself in a city where nobody knew her name or her grief, and that felt exactly like what she needed. She met Jae Hyun at a business dinner she almost didn't attend. She had been tired that evening, the particular kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with loneliness. And she had stood in front of her hotel room mirror for almost 10 minutes, debating whether to invent an illness and stay in. She went because her supervisor would have noticed, and she didn't want the conversation that would follow. Jae-hyun wasn't the most powerful person in the room that night, but he moved like he was. He had a quality she had no better word for than stillness. Not the stillness of someone passive, but the stillness of someone who had decided long ago that he would never need to raise his voice to be heard. He was 10 years older than her. He wore no jewelry except a single watch she later learned cost more than most people's cars. He spent the first half of the dinner talking to no one and the second half talking only to her. He asked her real questions, not the usual questions she fielded at business events. Where are you from? How long have you been in Seoul? Do you speak Korean? He asked her what she was tired of. He asked her what kind of silence she preferred. He asked her, with complete seriousness, what she thought people most often misunderstood about the way she carried herself. Nobody had ever asked her that before. She answered honestly, because something about the way he looked at her made dishonesty feel like more effort than it was worth. She told him that people often read her composure as coldness, when really it was just protection. That she had learned early that a woman who shows her edges gets them used against her. That she had spent most of her adult life translating herself for rooms that were never really built to include her. He listened without interrupting. Then he said quietly, "You shouldn't have to translate yourself for anyone." She went home that night and thought about those 7 words for hours. They were together within 3 months. She was under no illusions about what Jae-hyun was. By the time they were exclusive, she had a reasonable understanding of where his money came from, and it was not from legitimate business alone. The Kong Syndicate was one of the most powerful criminal organizations operating across East Asia. Narcotics moving through shell companies, protection arrangements with half the port authorities in 4 countries, and a network of loyalty that reached into courthouses and government offices in places Nia had never been. Jae-hyun didn't hide this from her. He didn't advertise it either. He simply existed as what he was, and he let her decide what to do with the truth. She stayed. She has asked herself 1,000 times since then whether that decision made her foolish or simply human. The honest answer was probably both. She stayed because she loved him, and because love at 26 doesn't always have the wisdom to ask the questions it should. But she also stayed because underneath the danger and the power and the things she chose not to look at too directly, she saw something in Jae-hyun that she genuinely believed was worth reaching for. A man who was capable of softness with her even when the world around him was made entirely of hard edges. A man whose aging mother called Nia daughter within the first year and meant it. They married quietly, in a private ceremony in Jeju Island with 12 people present, none of them press, and most of them armed. And then the real life began. The first year was the most honest one. They fought sometimes, real fights, not the polished disagreements people perform for each other when they're still trying to look good. Nia was stubborn in ways she had never fully admitted to herself, and Jae-hyun had a habit of going silent during conflict in a way that made her feel like she was shouting into empty space. They had a fight in their second month of marriage that lasted 4 days and ended only because she packed a bag, sat in the lobby of a hotel across town, and waited to see what he would do. He came. 3 in the morning, still in the clothes he'd been wearing when she left, and he sat down across from her in the hotel lobby and said, "Tell me what I did wrong. All of it. I'm not leaving until you do." They sat there until sunrise. That was the man she had married, the man who showed up, the man who could sit inside discomfort instead of fleeing it, the man who, when his own pride told him to wait her out, chose her instead. But criminal organizations have a gravity to them. The longer you are inside one, the more it reshapes everything around it, including the people who run them. By year 3, Jae-hyun was traveling more, sleeping less, and returning home with a kind of weight on him that Nia could feel without touching him. He stopped asking her the real questions. He stopped sitting with her in uncomfortable silences until they became something workable. He started solving problems the way his world had always solved problems. With speed, with force, with the understanding that softness was a vulnerability that could get you killed. I wasn't cruel to her. She wanted to be clear about that, even years later, even after everything. He was never cruel. He was simply absent. In the room but not in it. Present in body, somewhere else entirely in every way that mattered. She adapted. That was what she did, what she had always done. She built herself a life inside the edges of his. She befriended his mother, a sharp-tongued woman named Myung-ja, who had survived things Nia would never fully know, and who loved her son with a ferocity that sometimes frightened people and always impressed Nia. She learned to manage the household in the way that was expected of her. Not cooking and cleaning, they had staff for that, but the invisible management, the social intelligence, the reading of which alliances needed tending and which conflicts needed to be quietly redirected before they became catastrophic. She did not carry a gun. She did not sit in on strategy meetings. But she was not naive about the world she occupied, and she was not useless in it. What nobody in that world ever bothered to understand was that Nia Okafor had been navigating hostile environments her entire life. She had walked into rooms where people looked through her before she spoke. She had learned to build trust with people who started out skeptical and left as allies. She had been doing the unglamorous, underestimated work of keeping things together long before she ever met Jae-hyun Kang. And she went right on doing it inside his world with the same quiet competence she'd brought to everything else. She never asked for recognition. That was partly her nature and partly the lesson her mother had drilled into her. Do the work because the work matters, not because someone is watching. But over time, the invisibility wore on her in ways she didn't admit even to herself. Small things, The way Jae-hyun's captains would look past her when they spoke to him in her presence. The way certain wives in the syndicate's inner circle treated her warmth as weakness, her composure as something that needed to be tested. The whispers she was not supposed to hear about whether a black woman could truly understand the world her husband occupied, whether she belonged at the table, whether her presence was a liability. She never mentioned any of it to Jae-hyun. She told herself she didn't want to add to his burdens. But the deeper truth was that she had stopped believing he would turn toward her the way he once had. That somewhere between year 3 and year 7, the man who had sat in a hotel lobby until sunrise had been replaced by someone who assumed she was fine because she never said otherwise. Sabrina arrived 2 years into the marriage. Nia's cousin, her mother's sister's youngest child, 12 years younger than Nia, raised in a different city, different life, different world. They hadn't been close growing up. There was distance between their families, old tensions Nia had never fully understood, and geography that made closeness difficult. But after Nia's mother died, Sabrina had been one of the only people from her family who called regularly. Not just in the first weeks, when everyone calls, but months later, when most people have moved on, and grief has become something you're supposed to be managing quietly on your own. That meant something to Nia. When Sabrina said, 3 years after the marriage, that she was thinking of moving to Seoul, exploring opportunities, seeing more of the world, maybe staying with Nia for a few months while she got established. Nia said yes without hesitation. She said yes because she was lonely. She said yes because she missed family. She said yes because Sabrina was warm and funny and filled the apartment with noise in a way that made Jae-hyun's absences easier to bear. She said yes because she trusted her. That was the mistake. Not loving someone, not opening her home. The mistake was trusting without watching. Believing that family meant safety when she had enough experience to know that the people who can hurt you most are always the ones you never thought to protect yourself from. It started so slowly she didn't see it. Sabrina laughing at Jae-hyun's jokes in a way that lingered a half-second longer than necessary. Sabrina finding reasons to be home on evenings when Nia had plans, when Jae-hyun would be alone. Sabrina asking questions about the syndicate that Nia answered because she assumed curiosity, not calculation. Nia wasn't stupid, but she was tired. And tired people miss things. Tired people choose the interpretation that requires less energy, because the alternative, the thing the evidence is actually pointing toward, costs more than they have left to spend. So she missed it. She missed it for months. And then came a Tuesday in late October. A cold evening, rain cutting hard against the windows. The kind of Seoul night that makes the whole city look like it's underwater. Nia had been at a dinner event for a nonprofit she quietly supported. An organization providing legal assistance to families affected by organized crime, which Jae-hyun didn't know about and would not have approved of, and which was perhaps the truest expression of who she was underneath everything she'd learned to be. The event ended 2 hours early. The speaker had taken ill. The venue was clearing out by 8:30. She had planned to surprise him. She had thought, on the drive home, that it had been too long since they had simply sat together with nothing demanding their attention. She had bought food from the restaurant he used to take her to when they were first together, before he became fully who he was, when they were still figuring each other out. She had thought maybe if she created enough of the right conditions, she could find the version of him she was still looking for. She came in through the private elevator, the one that opened directly into their floor. She heard voices before the doors fully opened. His, and another one that stopped the breath in her chest. Sabrina's. She stood still in the elevator for 3 full seconds, the food bags in her hands, telling herself there was an explanation that wasn't what her body already knew it was, that Sabrina had probably just stopped by, that there were 100 innocent reasons 2 people would be talking behind a door, laughing the way they were laughing. She stepped out. She didn't call out. She didn't know why. Some animal instinct told her to be quiet, and she listened to it. She moved toward the bedroom hallway, where the light was coming from, where the voices were coming from, and she stopped just beside the door that stood open 3 inches. She heard her husband's voice, loose and unguarded in a way she hadn't heard in years, the way he used to sound with her, before. She tries so hard. That's the thing. She's always trying, every single day. It's like living with someone who's auditioning to be your wife instead of just being one. Sabrina's laugh was low and knowing. She thinks if she loves you enough, you'll become someone different. She never understood what I am. Do you still? No. The word came out flat and final, the way Jae-hyun said things when he was certain. I haven't for a long time. She's a good woman, but good women aren't what I need. I need someone who doesn't flinch, someone who fits. And you think that's me? A pause, long enough to answer everything. Marrying her was the biggest mistake I ever made. I stayed because leaving felt cruel, but I'm done performing something that died 3 years ago. Nia stood in that hallway for a moment that felt like it lasted several lifetimes. She did not make a sound. She did not let her bags drop, though her hands had gone completely numb. She stood with 7 years of her life rearranging themselves inside her chest. Everything she had built and protected and chosen and defended restructuring itself into something unrecognizable. Then, very carefully, she looked down at her left hand. She set the food bags on the hallway table. She pulled the ring from her finger, slowly, like she was doing something that deserved to be done properly, and she placed it beside the bags. She walked back to the elevator. She pressed the button. She waited. And when the doors closed behind her, she allowed herself, for exactly the length of that elevator ride, to feel the full weight of what had just happened. By the time she reached the lobby, her face was dry and her hands had stopped shaking. She called her attorney from the car. Not a friend, not her cousin, not anyone who would ask her if she was sure or try to talk her into waiting until morning. Her attorney. And by sunrise, the papers were filed. The divorce papers arrived at Jae-hyun Kang's private office at 7:14 in the morning. His personal secretary, a thin man named Cho, who had worked for him for 11 years and survived 3 different attempts on Jae-hyun's life by the sheer virtue of being invisible and useful, placed the envelope on the desk with both hands and said nothing. He didn't need to. The return address on the envelope, Kim, Park & Associates, the most aggressive family law firm in Seoul, said everything that needed saying. Jae-hyun was on a call when Cho set it down. He glanced at the envelope, glanced at Cho, finished his call without missing a word. Then he sat there for a full minute, looking at the envelope without touching it. He had known, on some level, that Nia had come home early the night before. He had heard the elevator, had registered the sound the way you register small sounds in a building you know intimately, and then the silence afterward. He had assumed she'd reconsidered, gone back out, given him privacy he hadn't asked for but had clearly needed. He had told himself that in the morning he would handle it, manage the situation. He was good at managing situations. The envelope told him the situation had already managed itself. He opened it slowly, with the same deliberate control he brought to everything. He read the first page, the second. He set the papers back down on his desk with the careful precision of a man who is working very hard not to react. Then he called Sabrina. She answered on the second ring, voice soft and slightly sleepy in a way she calculated perfectly. Is everything okay? She filed, he said. A pause. Not a surprised pause. He would remember that later, that it wasn't surprised. Already? Papers were filed before sunrise. Jae-hyun, I'll call you later. He ended the call. He sat alone in his office for another 10 minutes, and the thing that moved through him during those 10 minutes was not grief and not guilt. It was something much smaller and much more dangerous than either of those things. It was wounded pride. He had not believed she would actually do it. That was the honest truth he would never admit to another living person. He had understood that things between them had deteriorated. He had known, on the level where you know things you refuse to fully look at, that Nia had been quietly disappearing from him for months. Not physically, she was always there, but in the ways that mattered, in the quality of her presence, the warmth that used to reach him across a room without any effort, and had lately required him to cross all the distance himself. He had registered all of that, the way you register weather, present, unpleasant, not yet your emergency. He had not believed she would leave. That was his first mistake, the kind of mistake that, once made, tends to generate a long chain of smaller mistakes behind it. He called his attorney next, a man named Shin, who was ruthless in courtrooms and terrified of Jae-hyun in exactly the right proportion. He told Shin to review the papers and identify every point of leverage available to him. Then he hung up and went to find Sabrina, because the one thing he was not going to do was sit alone in his own office feeling like something had been taken from him. Sabrina was in the guest suite. She had moved into the apartment 3 months ago under the pretense of renovation at her own place, and Nia had allowed it with a graciousness that Jae-hyun had barely noticed at the time. She was dressed already, sitting at the small table near the window with coffee she'd clearly made herself rather than asking the staff. There was something studied about her composure, though he didn't name it yet. "She's not bluffing," he said, closing the door behind him. Sabrina looked up at him with an expression that managed to be simultaneously sympathetic and something else underneath. "People file papers all the time without following through. Nia doesn't do things she doesn't mean. You said yourself she's been unhappy for—" "I know what I said." His voice dropped in a way that made Sabrina go still. That was the voice people who worked for him had learned to respond to immediately. Not loud, not threatening in any obvious way, just stripped down to something underneath the social surface. "What I'm telling you is that she filed before sunrise. That means she had her attorney on call. That means this wasn't a reaction, it was a decision she'd already made before last night." Something crossed Sabrina's face, too quick to name. Maybe she suspected something, or heard something. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. Sabrina set her coffee down. "Jae-hyun, even if she heard," he said, very quietly, "then she heard things I said that I should not have said. In my own home. About my own wife." He watched Sabrina's expression recalibrate. She was good at that, shifting gears smoothly, adjusting the angle of her presentation without appearing to. He had found that quality attractive once. In this moment, watching it happen in real time, he found it slightly unsettling in a way he filed away and did not examine. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "What I'm not going to do," he said, "is chase her." He believed that when he said it. He believed it for exactly 4 days. The 4th day was a Thursday. He knew because he had a standing meeting with his senior captains every Thursday at noon, and he was sitting in that meeting when his personal phone lit up with a message from the property manager of the building where Nia had grown up. She had given the man Jae-hyun's contact information years ago as an emergency secondary contact, and the man apparently hadn't updated his records. The message was brief, informational, entirely mundane. The storage unit registered in Nia Okafor's name had been cleared out that morning. Could Mr. Kong please confirm whether the account should be closed? She was clearing out storage units. She was gone. Not angry gone. Not waiting to be chased gone. She was methodically, practically, permanently gone. The kind of gone that involves logistics. He set the phone face down on the table and returned his attention to his captains. His senior captain, a broad-shouldered man named Do-yoon, who had been with the syndicate for 19 years and had the particular quality of someone who notices everything and comments on nothing, was in the middle of a report about a rival organization pushing into their port operations in Busan. Jae-hyun listened. He asked 2 questions. He made a decision. The meeting moved on. Nobody in that room said a word about the divorce papers. They all knew. They all said nothing. That was the protocol. That was also, he realized, the particular loneliness of his position, the absolute inability to be a human being in front of the people who worked for him. Because human beings in his world were vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities were invitations. It was after that meeting, walking back through the private corridors of the building that housed his operations, that he passed 2 of his junior associates in a hallway. They didn't hear him coming, his footsteps were quiet and the hallway acoustics were poor, and he caught a fragment of conversation before they registered his presence and went rigid. Heard she just left. Took nothing. Not even the accounts. His wife? Ex-wife, or soon-to-be, walked out with a suitcase. A suitcase. A low laugh, quickly swallowed. 7 years and she leaves with a suitcase. What does that say? He walked past them, didn't stop, didn't acknowledge that he'd heard. They pressed themselves against the wall as he passed, and he felt their discomfort without looking at either of them. But the words stayed with him. A suitcase. He hadn't known that. He had assumed she'd taken what was hers, the accounts she had access to, the jewelry, the things that were legally and morally her property after 7 years of marriage. He had assumed because assuming was easier than knowing. He went home that evening and walked through the apartment with a kind of attention he hadn't given it in years. Nia's presence was everywhere and nowhere. Her books were gone from the shelf beside the window where she used to read in the mornings. The small framed photo of her mother that had sat on the dresser, gone. The reading lamp she'd brought from her previous apartment, the one with the slightly bent shade she'd always meant to replace but never did, gone. Her wedding ring was on the hallway table beside a bag of food from Mingles, the restaurant where he'd taken her on their third date. The food was cold, had been cold for 4 days. The staff had worked around it, apparently, uncertain whether they were permitted to move it. He stood there for a long time, looking at that cold bag of food and that ring on the table, and he felt something move through him that was uncomfortable enough that he immediately converted it into anger, because anger was an emotion he knew how to use. He called Shin. Slow the process down, every procedural delay available. That will make things more complicated long term. I didn't ask for a forecast, I asked for delays. He hung up. He was not ready to let her go. He told himself it was pride. He told himself it was principle. That a Kong didn't simply accept rejection without response. He told himself many things, and underneath all of them was something he could not yet afford to look at directly. 3 weeks after the papers were filed, Sabrina moved fully into the master bedroom. It was not a decision Jae-hyun made consciously, so much as something that happened through accumulated small permissions. A morning she stayed instead of returning to the guest suite. An evening they had dinner together, and it seemed natural for her to be there after. He was not in love with Sabrina. He understood that already. But she was present in a way that required nothing complicated from him, and complicated was what he was trying to avoid. He also, on some level, wanted the world to see that he was not diminished. That was the calculation underneath everything else. The syndicate watched everything. Rivals watched the syndicate. Weakness was an invitation. If Nia walking away looked like abandonment, like his own wife deciding he wasn't worth staying for, then the image required management, and Sabrina was the management. He would understand much later how catastrophically stupid that calculation was. The whispers started almost immediately, not about his marriage, which was already known to be dissolving, but about Sabrina herself. It began with small things that Do-yoon mentioned in his characteristically understated way. A captain's wife had seen Sabrina at a restaurant in Gangnam with a man nobody recognized. The man had not been identified. The meeting had looked casual on the surface. Do-yoon had mentioned it only because it was his job to mention things. Jae-hyun filed it under jealousy and social maneuvering, the typical behavior of women in the syndicate's inner circle trying to destabilize a newcomer. He told Do-yoon he appreciated the information and moved on. He was wrong to move on. But that would take time to become clear, and in the meantime, the more immediate disaster was unfolding in a direction he was not watching. Inside the syndicate, Nia's absence created a vacuum nobody had anticipated, because nobody, including Jae-hyun, had fully understood what she'd been doing. The first sign was a breakdown in a long-standing arrangement with the Yoon family, a minor but strategically critical alliance that had kept a particular shipping corridor in Incheon running smoothly for 4 years. The Yoon family patriarch was a 68-year-old man who was deeply traditional, deeply suspicious of outsiders, and who had agreed to the arrangement not because of money or fear, both of which Jae-hyun had offered at various points, but because of Nia. Because she had sat with his wife when the woman was ill and nobody else from the syndicate world had thought to visit. Because she had remembered his grandson's name and asked after him at every meeting. Because she had, through the particular intelligence of someone who understood that relationships are built in small moments rather than large gestures, made the old man feel that the Kong organization saw him as a person rather than a resource. Nia was gone. The old man was not hostile. He was simply no longer warm. And warmth, in alliances built on personal trust rather than contractual obligation, is not decorative. It is structural. The Yoon arrangement began fraying within 6 weeks of her departure. Do-yoon reported this to Jae-hyun at their Thursday meeting carefully, watching his boss's face the way he always did. The Yoon family has declined the renewal meeting twice now. No stated reason, simply unavailable. Send a better offer. I think it may not be a financial issue, sir. Everything is a financial issue. Do-yoon said nothing else. He had learned over 19 years when the conversation was over. The second sign came from an unexpected direction. Myung-ja, Jae-hyun's mother, called him on a Sunday morning. She never called on Sundays. She believed phone calls on Sundays were disrespectful to whatever rest the universe intended. And when he answered, her first words were not a greeting. "What did you do to that girl?" "Mother, don't mother me. I'm asking you a direct question. What did you do?" He had explained, in the careful language of a man managing his parents' emotions, that the marriage had simply run its course. that these things happened, that both of them had changed. His mother was silent for a moment that stretched in a way that reminded him, viscerally, of being 12 years old and caught in a lie. "Nia called me," she said finally. His chest tightened. "When?" "This morning after she left. She called to tell me herself before I heard from anyone else. She didn't say anything against you. She asked how my health was. She made me promise to keep taking my medication." A pause. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "Mother, the woman who had every reason to let me hear about this from gossip called me personally, that morning, with everything she was carrying." Her voice was steady in the way it got when she was most serious. "You married a remarkable person. Whatever you did or didn't do, I want you to understand that clearly." "I understand." "I don't think you do yet," she said, "but you will." She ended the call. He sat with his phone in his hand for a while after that, and the thing his mother had said moved through him in a way he couldn't immediately shake. The image of Nia, the morning after finding out, the morning after filing papers, in the middle of whatever she was managing and surviving, calling his mother. Not to complain, not to make an ally, simply because she thought Myungja deserved to hear it directly and with dignity. That was who she was. That had always been who she was. He pushed the thought down and called Sabrina. She answered immediately, which she always did, and they talked about something forgettable, and he felt the tension ease slightly, and that felt like a solution even though it wasn't. The actual crisis arrived on a Wednesday in December, 47 days after the papers were filed. It came in the form of a phone call from a man named Ryu, who ran the syndicate's financial infrastructure with the kind of meticulous paranoia that made him invaluable and exhausting to be around. Ryu never called without cause. When his name appeared on the screen, Jae-hyun was already standing before he answered. "There's a problem with the Daejeon accounts," Ryu said without preamble. "The reconciliation numbers don't match. I've been working the discrepancy for 3 days. I didn't want to bring it to you until I was certain." "How much?" "The amount isn't the primary concern," which meant the amount was significant. "The movement pattern is. Money has been redirected through a series of intermediary accounts in a way that is designed to look like normal variance. If I hadn't been running the particular audit I was running, it would have gone unnoticed for at least another quarter." "Someone inside?" "Has to be. The access required is not external." Jae-hyun asked 3 more questions, got 3 careful answers, and ended the call. He stood in the center of his study, and for the first time in 47 days, the noise in his head about Nia and Sabrina and pride and perception went completely quiet, replaced by the cold, clarifying silence of a real threat. Someone in his organization was stealing from him, not skimming. The syndicate had managed low-level skimming from the edges for years. It was almost an accepted cost. This was structured, deliberate, designed to avoid detection. The kind of operation that required patience, intelligence, and access. He called Do-yoon at 11 o'clock at night and told him to come in. Do-hyun arrived within 20 minutes, which meant he hadn't been sleeping either. "I need you to run a quiet check," Jae-hyun said. "Every person with level 2 financial access or above. I want their movements, their communications, anything unusual in the last 6 months." Do-yoon's face didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. 6 months, he repeated. "Yes. That would include people who are no longer everyone." A pause. "I'll need 2 weeks to do it properly." "You have 10 days. Do-yoon nodded and left, and Jae-hyun went to the window and looked out at the city and tried to think clearly about who would have the access, the motive, and the intelligence to run something like this inside his organization without being caught. He made a list in his head. It was a short list because the circle of people with that level of access was small by design. He did not put Sabrina's name on the list. Not yet. Because she hadn't been given level 2 access, he was certain of that. He had been deliberate about it, keeping her presence social rather than operational. But even as he told himself that, something moved in the back of his mind. A small, cold thing. The kind of thought that arrives before you're ready for it. She had been inside this apartment for 3 months before Nia left. She had been present for dinners, for phone calls taken in rooms that should have been private, for conversations that happen in the natural way. Conversations happen when you forget, momentarily, that the person nearby is not as known to you as they feel. He turned from the window. The cold thought got colder. He pulled up the restaurant name on his phone. the one Do Yoon had mentioned weeks ago, where Sabrina had met the unidentified man. He had dismissed it at the time. He looked at it now with different eyes, the way you look at something you passed without stopping and then turned around to examine more carefully because something about it didn't sit right. He typed the restaurant name into a search, found it, upscale, private. The kind of place where booths had high backs and reservations required a name that someone checked against a list. Not the kind of place you ended up in casually, the kind of place you went when you wanted to be seen by the right people or completely unseen by everyone else. He set the phone down. He needed to think, and thinking required honesty, and honesty required him to consider the possibility that he had, in the last 47 days, made a catastrophic error in judgment that was still compounding around him while he was busy managing his pride instead of his organization. He thought about Nia, not the way he'd been thinking about her, which was as an absence, a bruise, a problem to be managed, but the way his mother had made him think about her. As someone who had called Myungja the morning after her life fell apart, because she believed the old woman deserved to hear it with dignity. As someone who had filed papers before sunrise, because when Na Okafor made a decision, she made it completely. As someone who had walked out of his apartment with a suitcase when she had legal access to everything else. Who does that? Who leaves that way? Someone who was never in it for what she could take. The cold thing in the back of his mind got very loud. Because if Nia was exactly who she had always presented herself as, and he was starting to understand, with the particular clarity that comes too late, that she was, then the person he had let move into her place was someone he had not examined with anything close to the scrutiny the situation deserved. He was still at the window when the bedroom door opened and Sabrina appeared in the doorway, her expression calibrated to the right blend of concern and composure. "You're still up," she said. "Yes." "Is something wrong?" He looked at her, really looked at her, the way he had not looked at anyone in months, the way you look when you are no longer performing ease but actually trying to see. "Not yet," he said. She tilted her head. "What does that mean?" "It means go back to sleep." She held his gaze for a moment, just a moment, and then she did exactly that. She went back to the bedroom and closed the door quietly. And Jae Hyun Kang stood at the window of the apartment where his wife's ring was still sitting on the hallway table, where cold food from a restaurant she had loved was still in a bag. Nobody had moved, and he began very slowly to understand the shape of what he had walked himself into. He had been so consumed with what he lost that he had not yet looked clearly at what had moved in to replace it. That would change now. He called Ryu back at midnight. The 6-month audit extended to 14 months. Ryu was quiet for a second. "That's when—" "I know when that is." Another silence. "Okay," Ryu said carefully. "I'll need more time." "Take 12 days, Jaehyun said. "But Ryu—" He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was the stripped-down one, the one without any surface left on it. "Be very thorough, and be very quiet." He ended the call. Somewhere in the city, in a small apartment Nia had found on her own, and was furnishing piece by piece, she was either asleep or awake, and he had no way of knowing which. And for the first time in 7 years, he felt the specific weight of not knowing something about her that he had taken for granted every single night. He would not sleep. He stood at the window until the city began going gray at the edges with the approaching morning, and the thing taking shape in his mind was no longer about pride or perception or what the syndicate thought of him. It was about the very specific possibility that the woman he had mocked in his own bedroom had called a burden, a mistake, a weight he was glad to be setting down, had been, without his knowledge or acknowledgement, the thing standing between his empire and the person now sleeping in his bed. Ryu's report landed on Jae Hyun's desk on a Friday morning, 12 days after the midnight phone call. It was 43 pages long. Ryu had printed it rather than sending it digitally, which told Jae Hyun everything he needed to know about how serious it was before he read a single word. Ryu didn't print things. Ryu believed paper was a liability. The fact that he had printed this meant he didn't trust any electronic channel with what was inside it. Jae Hyun read it alone, door locked, phone face down. He read it twice. Then he sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a long time, doing the particular kind of thinking that requires absolute stillness on the outside because everything on the inside is moving very fast. The money trail was meticulous. Ryu had reconstructed it transaction by transaction, tracing the redirections through 7 intermediary accounts across 4 different countries, each hop designed to look like normal operational variants. Whoever had built the structure knew the syndicate's financial architecture intimately, not the surface layer that mid-level people saw, but the actual infrastructure underneath. The timing of each transfer suggested knowledge of the internal audit schedule, because every significant movement happened in the windows between reviews. The total amount extracted over 14 months was substantial enough to fund a small war. But the money was not the worst part of the report. The worst part was on page 31, buried inside a section Ryu had labeled, with characteristic understatement, additional findings of concern. Over the same 14-month period, specific operational details, convoy routes, meeting locations, the identities of 3 informants embedded inside rival organizations, the schedule of a particularly sensitive negotiation in Osaka had been leaked to the CO syndicate. The CO family operated out of Busan and had been a manageable competitor for years, contained primarily because Jae-hyun's organization had consistently maintained informational superiority. That superiority had been quietly, systematically dismantled. The 3 informants had all died within the past 8 months, 2 in accidents, 1 in a manner that was less ambiguous. Jae-hyun had attributed all 3 deaths to bad luck and the general dangers of the work. He had not connected them. Nobody had connected them because nobody had been looking at the pattern. Ryu had found the pattern, and at the end of page 31, in the careful, bloodless language of a man who understood that what he was writing could get him killed if it reached the wrong eyes, Ryu had noted that the access profile for all leaked information matched a single user credential, a temporary administrative account that had been created 14 months ago and assigned to a consultant brought in to assist with a routine systems review. The consultant's name in the internal records was a shell, a fiction, a name attached to nothing real. But the IP address log showed the account had been accessed, repeatedly, from inside this building, from inside the residential floors, from inside the apartment. Jae-hyun closed the report. He set it flat on his desk, aligned it with the edge with a precision that had nothing to do with neatness and everything to do with keeping his hands occupied while his mind caught up with what his body already understood. 14 months ago. Sabrina had arrived 13 months ago. He stood up from his desk slowly, the way you move when you're being very careful not to let the thing inside you get ahead of you. He walked to the window, looked out at Seoul going about its business 10 stories below, indifferent and ordinary, and he stood there until his breathing was exactly the rate he wanted it to be. Then he called Do-yoon. "Come to my office, now, alone." Do-yoon arrived in 4 minutes, which meant he had been close, which meant he had been waiting. Jae-hyun noted that without commenting on it. He slid the report across the desk. "Page 31, he said. "Read it. Take your time." Do-hyun read it. His face did what it always did, which was almost nothing, a quality Jae-hyun had valued for 19 years and valued more than ever in this moment. When he finished, he set the report back on the desk with the same careful alignment Jae-hyun had used, and he looked up. "How long have you known?" Jae-hyun asked. A pause, honest and brief. "I didn't know. I suspected something was wrong in a general way about 6 weeks after she arrived. The Yoon situation. A few other things that felt slightly off. Nothing I could point to." "You didn't bring it to me?" "No." "Why?" Do-yoon's jaw moved slightly. "Because she was in your apartment, sir, and I didn't have evidence. I had instinct, and I had—" He stopped. "Say it." "I had concern about how you would receive it, given the circumstances with Mrs. Kang." The use of that title in the present tense landed in the room with unexpected weight. Jae-hyun let it sit there. "She's not Mrs. Kang anymore." "No." Do-yoon didn't apologize for the slip. "She's not." Jae-hyun turned back to the window. "I need to know who she's working for inside the SEO organization, not just the contact, the handler, the person who recruited her, briefed her, managed her. That's the person I need. That will take time and it will require, do whatever it requires." He paused, quietly. "Nothing moves against her until I have the full picture. I need to know everything she's passed before she knows I know." "Understood." Do-yoon picked up the report. "And the accounts? The money she moved? Leave them. Don't touch the trail. If she checks, and she will check, Everything needs to look undisturbed. Do-yoon nodded once, tucked the report under his arm, and moved toward the door. Do-yoon, he stopped. The three informants. Jae-hyun's voice was flat. Find out who specifically ordered their terminations, not who executed, who ordered. Do-yoon left without answering, because there was no answer to give yet, and they both knew it. Jae-hyun remained at the window for a long time after the door closed. 3 people were dead because of information that had moved through his apartment, through his home, through the space where he slept. He had been living inside a compromise for over a year, and he had been so consumed with managing his marriage, his image, his pride, that he had created the conditions for it himself. He had brought Sabrina in. He had kept her close. He had handed her proximity and assumed that proximity was safe because she was family to someone he trusted. He had trusted Nia's judgment about her cousin without ever applying his own. That thought was particularly brutal. He set it aside because he could not afford it right now. What he could not set aside, what began working through him in the hours after Do-yoon left, was the arithmetic of the timeline. 14 months of systematic extraction. 13 months since Sabrina arrived. That 1-month discrepancy meant the operation had been established, the account created, the access built, before she physically moved in. Someone had prepared the ground. She hadn't improvised her way into his organization. She had been placed, which meant this had started as a job, which meant Nia's cousin had been recruited specifically because of her connection to Nia, because of Nia's connection to him. He sat down, stood up again, walked to the far end of the office and back. Nia had trusted Sabrina because Sabrina had been there during her grief, had called when others stopped calling, had been warm and consistent and present in the specific ways that Nia, who had spent years being strong for everyone around her, would have been most vulnerable to. It had been calculated, all of it. The phone calls after her mother died, the warmth, the closeness, the move to Seoul. Someone had looked at Nia Okafor, seen a woman in grief who had limited family and unlimited loyalty, and decided she was the best available door into the Kong organization. Jae-hyun stopped walking. He stood in the center of his office and felt something happen inside him that was not anger. He was past anger. Anger was clean and simple, and this was neither of those things. What moved through him was more complicated and much harder to carry. A specific kind of devastation that comes from understanding all at once the full cost of every choice you made without thinking carefully enough. Nia had opened her home to Sabrina because she was lonely. She was lonely because he had been absent. He had been absent because he had been so busy running an empire that he had stopped running his marriage. And into the space his absence created, someone had placed a weapon. He had built the vulnerability himself. He went home that evening with his face arranged in its normal configuration. Sabrina was in the kitchen when he arrived, which was unusual. She rarely cooked, they had staff. And there was music playing at a volume that suggested she'd been there a while and had made herself thoroughly comfortable. She looked up when he came in, and her smile was exactly what it always was. Warm, slightly intimate. The smile of a person who believed they were winning. "You look tired," she said. "Long day." "Are you hungry? I ate." He set his jacket over a chair. "How was your day?" She told him about it. He listened with exactly the right amount of attention, the performance of presence he had perfected over years. And while she talked, he watched her hands, her eyes, the micro-timing of her expressions. He was looking for the seams in it, the places where the warmth was slightly ahead of or behind what the moment actually called for. He found several. He had always been able to read people. It was perhaps the core skill of his position. He had stopped reading Sabrina because he had stopped looking. Now that he was looking again, the performance was visible in the way performances always are once you're watching for them. Technically proficient, internally hollow. She was very good. He gave her that. But she was not Nia. Nia had never performed warmth. Nia's warmth was structural, load-bearing, the kind you only notice when it's gone because suddenly the whole building feels different. He had lived in that building for 7 years without understanding what was holding it up. "I'm going to take a call," he said when Sabrina finished talking. "Don't wait up." She nodded, and he went to his study and closed the door, and he sat there without making any calls, because the call he needed to make was not one he was ready for yet. He needed to call Nia, not to confess. Not yet. He needed information, Specific information about what Sabrina had asked her over the years, what conversations they'd had, what details Nia might have shared without knowing their significance. But he could not call her without telling her why. And he could not tell her why without opening a wound that was still very raw and asking her to bleed into it for his benefit. He sat with that for a long time. Then, at 10 o'clock, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail. Something made him answer. The voice on the other end was a man, low, careful, Korean, with a slight southern inflection that placed him somewhere in the Busan region. "Mr. Kong, I think you've been reading some interesting paperwork today." The skin on the back of his neck went cold. "Who is this?" "Someone who has been watching your organization experience some difficulties, and who has information that would be valuable to you. If you have information, make an appointment through your assistant, through the usual channels." A sound that was almost a laugh. "Mr. Kang, your usual channels have had a problem for over a year. I would have thought today's paperwork made that clear." Jaehyun said nothing. He was recalibrating, mapping the call, trying to identify the angle. "What do you want?" he said finally. "To make you an offer, in person. I think when you hear what I know about your current house guest and her arrangement with the CO family, you'll agree the meeting is worth your time." "And if this is a setup?" "Then you'll have lost an hour," the man said. "But it isn't. I can tell you this much for free. The money she's moved is not going to the Seo family directly. It's going somewhere else first, somewhere that will surprise you. And the informants, the 3 who died, their identities weren't leaked to the Seo family either. They were leaked to someone the Seo family is afraid of." Jaehyun's hand tightened on the phone. "There is a third party," the voice continued, "and you don't know they exist yet. That is a problem that is considerably larger than a disloyal woman in your apartment." The call ended. No name, no location. A second message arrived via an encrypted channel 3 minutes later with nothing but an address and a time. 48 hours from now. Jaehyun set the phone down. He sat in the silence of his study and felt the situation reconfigure itself around him. He had believed he was managing a betrayal. A serious one, damaging, but containable. Identify Sabrina's contact in the CO organization, cut the leak, address the damage, move on. That was the problem he had thought he had. That problem had just gotten significantly larger. A third party. Someone the CO family was afraid of. Someone who had been using Sabrina not to benefit the CO organization, but to accumulate leverage against it and against him simultaneously. Someone playing a longer game than anyone he had identified. He stood up and went to the window again. He had been at this window so many times in the past weeks that he had memorized the exact pattern of lights in the building across the street. He needed to think about the meeting. Whether to go, how to go, what protection to bring that didn't signal enough alarm to spook whoever was calling. He needed to think about Sabrina, who was 30 feet away in his bedroom, sleeping or pretending to sleep, unaware that her architecture had been found. He needed to think about the Seo family and what their reaction would be when they discovered their operation had been compromised, because they would discover it, and their response would not be passive. He needed to think about all of this. But what he actually thought about, for a long and unproductive moment, was Nia. He thought about what Ryu's report meant in a specific direction he hadn't let himself go yet. Because if Sabrina had been embedded to extract information from the Kong organization through personal access, and Nia had been Sabrina's primary access point, then Nia had been used, systematically, by someone she loved. Her grief had been identified as an entry point and exploited with patience and deliberate care. And Nia didn't know. She was out there in whatever apartment she'd found, rebuilding her life, carrying what she thought was just personal betrayal, the ordinary devastating kind, her husband and her cousin, without knowing that the betrayal was significantly more calculated than even that. He had to tell her. Not for his purposes. Not to get information. She needed to know because she was in the city, she was visible, and if there was a third party operating at the level this caller was suggesting, then the people connected to the Kong organization, even former connections, were not safe by default. He had to tell her. The realization that this was now necessary, that he had an obligation to reach out to the woman he had humiliated, whose ring was still sitting on the hallway table, for reasons that were about her safety and not his absolution, landed with a weight that was different from everything else he'd been carrying. He went to his desk and wrote 2 words on a piece of paper: call her. He folded it and put it in his jacket pocket because he was not capable of making that call tonight, and he needed the reminder to exist in a physical form that he could not delete or dismiss. Then he made the other calls. Do-yoon, first, about the meeting in 48 hours. Ryu, about isolating the compromised accounts without triggering any visible change. Shin, his attorney, about what divorce proceedings looked like if they needed to be suddenly accelerated. That last call surprised even himself. But the divorce, he now understood, served a purpose beyond whatever he'd originally intended by slowing it down. The faster the legal separation was finalized, the cleaner Nia's disconnection from the Kong name would be on paper. The cleaner it was on paper, the less justification anyone had for reaching toward her. He was trying to protect her by letting her go faster. He understood the irony. He did not enjoy it. He slept 3 hours that night, badly, with the weight of the report and the phone call and the piece of paper in his jacket pocket, all pressing on him in different ways. In the morning, Sabrina was at breakfast when he came downstairs, dressed well, easy in her manner, and he sat across from her and drank his coffee and talked about nothing. And she had absolutely no idea that every word she said was being evaluated differently than it had been 24 hours ago. The meeting happened 48 hours later, in a private room above a restaurant in a neighborhood in northwestern Seoul that Jae-hyun rarely had reason to visit. He went with 2 men he trusted absolutely, not Do-hyun, who he needed elsewhere, but 2 others who had been with him since before the syndicate had its current shape. The man waiting in the room was older than the voice had suggested. 60s, perhaps. Small, with the kind of stillness that Jae-hyun recognized as belonging to someone who had survived a great deal. He introduced himself with a name that was probably not his name, poured tea without asking, and began talking without any of the usual preliminary positioning. What he told Jae-hyun over the next 70 minutes dismantled the problem Jae-hyun had thought he had, and replaced it with a problem that was much worse. Sabrina had not been recruited by the Seo family. She had been recruited 2 years before she arrived in Seoul by a man named Baek, a former Kong captain who had been expelled from the organization 8 years ago under circumstances Jae-hyun had believed were resolved and buried. Baek had spent 8 years building a separate structure, quietly, using resentment and money and the patience of someone with a very specific long-term goal. The goal was not to steal from Jae-hyun, though he had stolen substantially. The goal was to accumulate enough compromising material, financial records, leaked identities, documented criminal arrangements, to deliver the entire Kong organization to the Korean Financial Crimes Authority in a single, coordinated disclosure. Not as an act of justice, as leverage. A nuclear option that would allow Baek to negotiate his own position from a place of absolute power. Sabrina was one of several instruments. She was the closest to the center. The man across the table from Jae-hyun explained all of this with the careful precision of someone who had been assembling the picture for a long time and understood its value. "Why are you telling me this?" Jae-hyun asked. "Because Baek is also moving against me. We have a shared problem. And I want Baek removed before he uses what he's collected. You want the same thing. Our methods and our reasons are entirely our own business." Jae-hyun studied the man's face for a long moment. How much of what he's collected is usable? Enough. If it reaches the authority intact, you're looking at a complete organizational exposure. Not just you. Everyone connected to the Kong name. Everyone connected to the Kong name. The words dropped into the conversation, and Jae-hyun felt them land in a specific way that had nothing to do with his captains, or his accounts, or his empire. Nia had been his wife for 7 years. Her name was on documents. She had attended events. She was known. Even if the legal separation was finalized tomorrow, the investigative reach of a coordinated criminal disclosure did not stop at the date a marriage ended. "When?" he said. His voice was completely level. "When does he move?" "My information says within 60 days. He's waiting for one more piece, something he doesn't have yet." "What piece?" The man looked at him for a moment. "The location of your mother." The air in the room changed. Myungja lived quietly, in a place known to very few people, under arrangements Jae-hyun had constructed specifically to keep her outside the reach of anything connected to his work. He had believed those arrangements were solid. He had built them himself years ago, before Sabrina, before any of this. But Sabrina had been in his home for 13 months, and his mother called him. And phones, even careful phones, left traces if someone is specifically looking for them. He stood up from the table slowly. "I'll be in touch," he said. He walked out of the restaurant and into the street, and for the first time in his adult life, Jae Hyun Kong stood on a public sidewalk with no performance available to him, no composure to manage, no version of himself that was adequate to what he was carrying. His mother, his empire, 3 dead men. And somewhere in this city, the woman he had destroyed, who had been used as a door into everything she loved without ever knowing it, was living in an apartment she'd furnished piece by piece, trying to build something clean out of the wreckage he'd made. He pulled the piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "Call her." He dialed before he was ready, standing on the sidewalk with the cold soul air moving around him. And he listened to the phone ring once, twice, 3 times, and then her voice, careful and composed and entirely herself, said his name as a question. "Jae Hyun?" And he said the only honest thing he was capable of saying in that moment, stripped of strategy and pride and every version of himself that had led him here. "Nia, you're not safe, and I need you to listen to me." Nia didn't answer right away. Not because she hadn't heard him. She'd heard every word. She heard the particular texture of his voice. Stripped of the controlled smoothness he wore like armor, reduced to something rawer underneath. And that texture told her more than the words did. In 7 years of marriage, she had learned to read Jae Hyun Kong through what he didn't perform rather than what he did. And what she was hearing now was a man who had run out of performance. That frightened her more than anything he'd actually said. "Nia." "I heard you," she said. Her voice was steady. She was standing in her kitchen, the small one in the apartment she'd found in Mapogu, a neighborhood far enough from their old life that she didn't run into anyone who knew her, but close enough to the nonprofit she worked with that she could walk there in the mornings. She had been making tea. The kettle was still hot in her hand. "Tell me what's happening," he told her. "Not everything, not yet, not standing on a sidewalk, but enough." Sabrina. The access. The extraction. The possibility that Nia herself had been the original entry point, the door that had been identified and used before Sabrina ever booked her flight to Seoul. Nia set the kettle down. She set it down very carefully on the counter, and then she put both hands flat on the surface and stood there with the information moving through her and didn't say anything for a long moment. "How long have you known?" she asked. 12 days since I had confirmation. I suspected longer." "And Sabrina is still in the apartment?" "Yes. She doesn't know I know." Another silence. Nia was doing mathematics she didn't want to do, reconstructing conversations, visits, the things she had said to Sabrina over years of what she'd believed was family, real family, the kind you choose to keep even when distance and time make it inconvenient. She was running back through every moment of warmth and recognizing, with a coldness that was almost clinical, the architecture underneath it. The specific questions Sabrina had asked, the particular interest she'd shown in Jae Hyun's schedule, his associates, the rhythm of the household. Things Nia had answered because she'd had no reason not to, because you don't interrogate the people you love. "Nia, are you there?" "I'm here." She picked up the kettle again, poured the tea, because she needed something to do with her hands. "What do you need from me?" She heard him exhale. "I need you to go somewhere safe tonight. Not your apartment. Somewhere nobody connected to me or to Sabrina would know to look." "You think I'm a target?" "I think you're a loose end to someone who manages loose ends aggressively." 3 people died, Nia. I'm not... He stopped. Restarted. "I'm not going to use careful language about this." "Don't," she said. "I don't want careful language." "Then yes. Until I contain this, your proximity to the Kong name makes you a liability to the people running this operation. I need you out of reach." She didn't argue. She didn't ask why she should trust him, though the question existed. What she did was walk to her bedroom and begin packing a bag with the efficient movements of someone who had already done this once before and remembered exactly how. "Your mother," she said, phone wedged between her ear and her shoulder. "She's in more danger than I am." "I know. I'm handling that tonight." "Does she know?" "Not yet." "Tell her the truth, Jaehyun. Don't manage it. Tell her." A pause that carried its own weight. I will. Where should I go? He gave her an address, a property that wasn't registered under his name or any name directly connected to him. A long-term arrangement through 2 layers of shell companies, used for exactly these kinds of situations. She memorized it without writing it down. Old habit from years of living beside someone whose world required discretion. Someone will be there, he said. His name is Kwan. He's been with me since before. I know Kwan, she said. He used to drive your mother to her appointments. Another silence, the kind that happens when someone realizes how much you remembered. Yes, he said. He did. I'll be there in an hour, she said. And then, before she could think better of it, Jae-hyun, when this is over, I want the full picture, everything, not a managed version. You'll have it. She ended the call, stood in the middle of her bedroom with her half-packed bag and the tea she hadn't drunk, and the particular sensation of a life she'd been carefully building from scratch suddenly tilting again beneath her feet. She finished packing, turned off every light, left the tea on the counter. She did not look back at the apartment as she pulled the door shut behind her, because she had learned by now that looking back while moving forward was the specific kind of self-punishment she could not afford. Jae-hyun moved the moment the call ended. He called Do-hyun first. 3 words, an address, a time. Then he called the 2 men he'd brought to the restaurant meeting and gave them separate instructions. Then he sent a single encrypted message to Ryu. Freeze the flagged accounts. Now. All of them. I don't care if she notices. Sabrina noticing was no longer a risk to be managed. The time for quiet had passed the moment the man in that restaurant told him about his mother. He took a car back to the apartment. He rode in the back seat with his jaw set and his eyes on the city moving past the window, and he was building the sequence in his head. Not emotionally, not yet. There would be time for the emotional accounting later. Right now the sequence was what mattered, the order of operations. Who moved first and where and what each action would trigger. He had run operations like this before, situations where multiple threads needed to be managed simultaneously, where the order of resolution determined whether you contained the damage or amplified it. He was good at this. It was the core competency of his position, the thing he was most ruthlessly efficient at. He had never run one from inside his own home against someone sleeping in his own bed. That was the variable he hadn't managed before. He filed the discomfort away and kept building the sequence. He was at the apartment by 9:30. Sabrina was on the couch, watching something on her phone with earbuds in, which meant she didn't hear him come in. He stood in the entryway for a moment, just a moment, and looked at her. The line of her shoulder, the ease of her posture, 13 months of performance, and she had never broken it in front of him. Not once. He had to give her that. He went to his study and closed the door and made the call he should have made 2 hours ago. His mother answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cautious in the way it always was with late calls. "It's me," he said. "I know it's you. What's wrong?" He told her. All of it, or enough of it. The version that communicated the danger without every granular detail that would only cause pain without purpose. Myungja listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her, and told him she understood the seriousness. When he finished, there was a silence. "You knew about Sabrina," she said. Not a question. "I found out recently." "How recently?" 12 days. "And you waited 12 days to call me." He didn't answer immediately. There was no good answer. "I was building the picture," he said. "I needed to know the full scope before you told your mother she might be in danger." "Yes." Another silence. Heavier. Jae-hyun. "I know." "Do you?" Her voice was not loud. His mother had never needed to raise her voice to make something land with full force. "Nia called me the morning after. She made sure I was all right before she made sure she was all right. And you, my own son, waited 12 days. I'm calling now." "Yes," she said very quietly. "You are. Now." He arranged for her to be moved that night, a team he trusted implicitly, a location he hadn't told anyone else. She accepted the arrangements with the pragmatic cooperation of a woman who understood this world and had survived it for decades. She did not soften toward him before the call ended, and he did not ask her to. He went back to the living room. Sabrina had taken the earbuds out and was looking at her phone with the expression of someone who has just seen something unexpected. She looked up when he came in, and her expression transitioned smoothly to the warm version, the one she wore for him, but the transition had a half-second lag that he would not have caught a week ago. He caught it now. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Sit down," he said. She looked at him. "Jae-hyun, sit down." She sat. The warmth hadn't left her face entirely, but it had rearranged itself into something more careful, more watchful. She was reading him now, the same way he was reading her, and they both knew it, and the pretense of ordinary evening had burned off completely in the span of those 2 words. He sat across from her. He didn't lean forward. He kept his posture open, relaxed, the specific body language of someone who has nowhere to be and nothing to hide, which was, of course, the opposite of the truth. "Tell me about Baek," he said. She didn't flinch. He'd expected a flinch, a flash of genuine shock, a moment of the mask slipping. What he got instead was a stillness that was almost impressive, a complete cessation of movement that told him she was buying herself the half-second she needed. "I don't know who that is," she said. "Sabrina." "I'm serious, I don't—" "The accounts," he said. "The ones you built through the intermediary structure in Singapore and the 2 in Hong Kong. Ryu found them, all of them. He's been working the trail for 2 weeks. He paused. "It's a good structure, genuinely good. Whoever designed it understood our audit schedule. That takes either inside knowledge or a very sophisticated external analysis." Her face went through something. Not breakdown, not yet, but a kind of compression, a tightening around the eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The 3 informants," he said. His voice was still level. He was not shouting. He did not need to shout. "Kim Yong-soo, Park Chulmin, Lee Hae-won, do you know those names?" Nothing on her face, too much nothing. "Those are people who are dead," he said, "because of information that moved out of this apartment." "You're accusing me of—" "I'm not accusing you of anything," he said. "I'm telling you what I know. There's a difference. Accusations are for people I'm uncertain about." She looked at him for a long moment, and then something shifted. It happened visibly. A decision made, a layer dropped, and underneath the warmth and the performance was something he hadn't fully seen before. Colder, more calculated, more real. "How much does your man actually have?" she said. Her voice had changed. The softness was gone from it, replaced by something flat and direct. "Enough." "Enough to do what?" "Enough to have this conversation without needing you to confirm anything." She looked at him steadily for a moment. Then she unfolded her legs from the couch, stood up slowly, and walked toward the window. He watched her. He didn't move. His 2 men were outside this apartment, one at the elevator, one at the stairwell. She wasn't going anywhere. "Beck told me you'd find it eventually," she said, her back to him. "He said you were good, but that by the time you found it, it wouldn't matter." "He was wrong about the timing." She turned around. "Was he?" Her expression was almost curious. "Jae-hyun, what exactly do you think you've stopped? The accounts are already drained. The information is already filed. The only thing finding it now does is tell you that you're already standing in the middle of something you can't contain." "Where is he?" "I don't know." "That's the one thing I'm going to ask you for the truth about. Where is Baek?" "I genuinely don't know," she said. "That's how he works. Nobody knows where he is. That was part of the structure. I passed information through cutouts, never directly. I've never met him in person." She paused. "The man you met in the restaurant 2 days ago wasn't working for you, by the way, in case that isn't clear yet." The air in the room shifted. "He works for Baek," she said. "Whatever he told you was designed to redirect you, to get you moving in a direction that served Baek's timeline." Jae-hyun looked at her for a long moment without speaking, and in that moment he was doing the fastest recalculation of his life, running the conversation in that restaurant backward through this new information, testing every piece of it against a different purpose, a different sender. "What's the timeline, Shutdown?" he said. "I told you, I don't—" "Sabrina." He stood up now, slowly, and crossed the room to where she stood, stopping 4 feet from her. Not aggressive, not threatening. The stillness again, the weight of it. "You are still in this apartment. You have not run, which means you are still operating, which means there is still a piece that hasn't moved yet. I am asking you what that piece is." She looked up at him. The calculation in her eyes was visible now, unobstructed. She was weighing something, the way you weigh an exit against a deal when both have costs. "Naya," she said. His jaw tightened, 1 millimeter. He kept everything else still. She has something Beck needs, Sabrina said. She doesn't know she has it. But when your mother died, about 3 years ago, my mother is alive. Was hospitalized briefly. Nia handled all her paperwork, including the document authorization for a particular property transfer that your mother had been arranging for years. The property was registered under a name I didn't recognize, and neither did anyone else, because Nia deliberately kept it separate from everything else. She did it to protect your mother from any exposure connected to the syndicate's assets. Sabrina's voice was steady, informational, the voice of someone who has already decided that the currency she has left is truth. Beck thinks that document, and the authorization trail it created, contains the location of assets that you moved 8 years ago, when you expelled him. Those assets don't exist anymore. He doesn't know that, and whether they exist or not doesn't matter. What matters is that he believes Nia has access to information that leads to them. And he has been patient about getting it through me, because going at her directly while she was your wife was too risky. But now she's not my wife. Now she's separated from your protection and connected to a legal process that makes her documents publicly accessible through the right kind of subpoena. She held his gaze. He's going to move on her. That's the last piece. That's what the 60-day window is for. Jae-hyun stepped back. 1 step. He turned away from her because he needed 2 seconds of not having his face visible while he absorbed this. Nia was already at the safe address. She was already with Kwon. He had moved her, and that was right, and the timing was right, but the reason he'd moved her had just changed shape significantly. He turned back. The man in the restaurant, he said. He told me 60 days. That was to give you a false horizon, to make you think you had time to build a response. The real window is... She stopped. How long? She looked at him. Something moved across her face that was not guilt exactly, but was the closest thing to it he'd seen from her yet. I activated a signal when your accounts froze. 20 minutes ago. That signal tells the cutout that the operation is compromised. She paused. He'll move tonight. The cold that hit him was not fear. He had not felt fear in a long time. He had trained it out of himself over many years because fear in his position was a malfunction. What hit him was something close to it, adjacent to it, but made of a different material. The specific sensation of understanding that someone you were supposed to be protecting is in danger right now, and the distance between you and them is measured in minutes. He was already moving before she finished the sentence. He pulled his phone as he walked, called Kwon directly, and the call went through on the second ring. Status. All clear, sir. She arrived 40 minutes ago. We're secure. Lock the building. Nobody in or out. Don't open for any reason until you hear my voice directly. Not a message. My voice. Understood. Sir, is there? Lock it. He ended the call and hit Do-yoon next. I need you at the Mapo address. Full team. Now. ETA 12 minutes. Make it 8. He went back to Sabrina. She hadn't moved from the window. She was watching him with an expression that had settled into something resigned and almost tired. The expression of someone who has been performing for a very long time and has finally, in the last few minutes, been relieved of the obligation. The cutout's name, he said. Give it to me. I know you don't have back. Give me the cutout. She told him. A name and a neighborhood. He sent it to Do-yoon in a text with 3 words attached. Find and hold. Then he looked at Sabrina one last time. You know what you've done, he said. It wasn't a question. It didn't need to be. Yes, she said. And then, with a directness that was the most honest thing she'd said in 13 months. I'm sorry about Nia. That part, using her grief. I didn't choose that. I was handed the approach. But you used it. She didn't answer. There was no answer that would do anything useful. He left 2 men with her and walked out. The drive to Mapo took 11 minutes. He didn't use the siren. No sirens, nothing that drew attention. And he sat in the front seat rather than the back because he couldn't be separated from the driver by that additional distance right now. He needed to see the road. His phone rang at minute 7. Unknown number. He answered. Mr. Kang. The old man from the restaurant. The voice was different now. No longer careful, no longer performing the role of informant with valuable goods to sell. Something harder underneath. I understand you've been having a conversation with your house guest. Where's Beck? Closer than you'd like. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting tonight. A pause. The woman you moved to Mapo. That was a reasonable instinct. Slightly late, but reasonable. The difficulty is that the building she's in has a secondary access point that your man Quan doesn't know about. We found it 3 weeks ago during a building survey. We're thorough. Jae-hyun's hand closed around the phone hard enough that his knuckles went white. If you touch her, we don't want her hurt. Hurt people draw attention. We want the document authorization she processed for your mother's property. She gives us that, and she walks away. Simple. There's nothing in that document that's between us and the document, Mr. Kang. Your opinion of its value isn't the relevant factor. He ended the call. Faster, he said to the driver. The driver pushed it. He called Quan. Secondary access, find it, now. Back of the building, service entrance or utility access, something you haven't checked. He heard Quan moving, heard commands being given. On it, sir, there's a utility corridor on the east side that connects to the adjacent building. The sound shifted, then, it's been used recently. The lock is... The call cut out. Not dropped. Cut. The line went from active to dead with the specific abruptness of deliberate interference. How far? He said to the driver. 4 minutes. 3. The car pushed harder through the Seoul night, and Jae-hyun Kang sat with a phone that had gone dead, and 4 minutes of distance between him and every mistake he'd made compounding into a single point of consequence. And he did not think about empire or reputation or the legal papers sitting in an attorney's office. I thought only about the woman in that building who had called his mother on the morning her life collapsed, and who had packed one suitcase when she had the legal right to everything, and who had said to him, only hours ago, on a call he'd almost made too late, don't use careful language. He had spent 7 years being careful about the wrong things. He was done being careful. The car came around the last corner and the building was visible ahead. And even from this distance, he could see that the light in the second-floor utility corridor, a light that should not have been on, was on. He was out of the car before it fully stopped, his feet hitting the pavement with the impact traveling up through his knees, and he was running. He had not run. Genuinely run. Not the controlled movement of someone managing a situation, in longer than he could remember. His body found the rhythm of it with an urgency that bypassed everything intellectual, everything strategic, everything he had built his sense of himself around for 2 decades. He hit the side entrance at full speed, Do-yoon's team pulling up behind him. He could hear the cars, could hear doors opening, and he went through the door without waiting. Utility corridor, concrete and industrial lighting and the smell of old building infrastructure, and at the far end of it a door that was standing open when it should have been locked. And through that door the sound of voices, 2 of them, male, speaking in low, rapid Korean that carried the flat cadence of professionals giving instructions rather than conversation. He went through the door. The room was a maintenance space, large, cluttered with equipment, poor lighting from 2 overhead fixtures that threw more shadow than light. Kwon was on the floor against the far wall, conscious but held there by a man with the particular efficiency of someone trained for exactly this kind of operation. A second man was by the door on the opposite side. Nia was standing in the center of the room, not crouched, not collapsed, standing upright, arms at her sides, with the composure of someone who has made a decision about how they are going to exist in this moment and is executing it completely. Her face was set in the expression he had seen once before, during a particularly hostile dinner with a rival family, years ago, when 3 men across the table had been collectively dismissive and cruel, and she had sat there with her chin level and her eyes clear, and she had not given them a single thing they were looking for. She was doing that now. In a maintenance room at 10:30 at night with 2 men she didn't know and the sound of running feet in the corridor behind her. The second man turned when Jae-hyun came through the door. His hand moved toward his jacket. Do-hyun's man came through the door immediately behind Jae-hyun, and the second man's hand stopped moving and the room reconfigured itself in the specific way rooms do. When the balance of force shifts completely and everyone present registers it simultaneously, nobody fired, nobody needed to. That kind of standoff has a language of its own, and everyone in the room spoke it. Jae-hyun crossed the room to Nia in 6 steps. He stopped in front of her and looked at her face, and she looked back at him. And there was an entire conversation in that look that had nothing to do with what was happening around them. Are you hurt? He said. No. Did they? No, she said. They wanted the document. I told them I didn't have it. They were deciding whether to believe me. Do you have it? She looked at him steadily. I destroyed it 4 years ago, when your mother's health improved and the transfer wasn't needed. I shredded everything because I didn't want any paper connecting your mother to anything in that world. He absorbed that. You never told me. You didn't know about it in the first place. I didn't think it mattered. It mattered tonight. I know, she said. I know that now. Around them, Do-yoon's team was handling the two men with the controlled efficiency of a process that had already reached its conclusion. Kwon was on his feet, checking himself over, professional dignity reassembling itself after the indignity of having been put on the floor. Chae-hyun didn't look away from Nia. She was studying his face the way she used to. Not the careful social reading she did with everyone else, but the deeper version, the one she reserved for him, the one that went past the surface into whatever was underneath it. He had missed being looked at that way. He had not let himself know how much until this moment, standing in a concrete room with the aftermath of crisis settling around them. The document doesn't exist, he said, to the room in general and to nobody in particular. Whatever Beck believes is in it, it's gone. 4 years ago. One of the two men said something. Do-yoon's man answered it. The specifics were procedural, and Jae-hyun was not listening to them. He was looking at Nia. I'm going to need you to come with me, he said. Not to the apartment, somewhere else. Somewhere I know is secure until this is finished. She considered him for a moment. The deliberate consideration of someone who is no longer giving automatic trust, who is deciding, actively, what to extend and to whom and on what basis. How long, she said. 48 hours. Maybe 72. I have work, she said. I know. The children at the center expect me. I know that too. She held his gaze for another moment. Then she turned to Kwon. Are you all right? Kwon blinked, slightly surprised to be addressed directly, in the way people who work in operational roles always are when the people they're protecting treat them like humans. Yes, ma'am. I apologize for the… Don't, she said. You did your job. This wasn't your fault. She turned back to Jae-hyun. 72 hours, she said. And then I want the full picture. All of it. No managed version, no selective disclosure, everything. You'll have it. You said that before. I meant it then too, he said. I just wasn't ready to deliver on it. She looked at him for a long moment that he did not try to fill with anything. Then she picked up the bag she'd dropped when they'd moved her into this room and said, Let's go. They walked out of the maintenance room and through the corridor and out into the Seoul night, and the air was cold the way October air in this city always is. That clean, cutting cold that makes everything feel slightly more real than it did indoors. Do-yoon was on the phone behind them, managing the threads that still needed managing. 2 cars waited at the curb. Jae-hyun opened the door of the second car, and Nia got in, and he went around to the other side and got in beside her. And for the first time in nearly 2 months, they were in the same space without the intermediary of lawyers or anger, or the enormous distance of chosen absence. Neither of them spoke for the first few minutes. The car moved through the city, and the lights of Seoul moved across the windows. And Jae-hyun sat beside the woman he had humiliated in his own home, and whom someone had identified as a weapon against him before he'd been stupid enough to provide the necessary conditions, and he was trying to find words that were adequate to the moment. There were none. He understood that. He was not going to try to produce them in a car at 10:30 at night, on the same evening she'd been held in a maintenance room by men who wanted something she'd destroyed 4 years ago to protect his mother. Myung-ja, Nia said after a while. Is she safe? Moved tonight. Did you tell her the truth? Yes. She nodded once, slowly. Good. More silence. The city moving past. Jae-hyun's phone buzzed continuously. Do-hyun, Ryu, Shin, names he had to respond to because the operation was still live. Baek was still out there. The cutout Sabrina had named was still being run down. He answered each message with one hand, his eyes forward. At some point, Nia said quietly, and to nobody in particular, I told her everything was going to be okay. When I called her that morning, I told her not to worry. She told me. I didn't know if it was true, she needed to hear something steady. That was, he stopped, started again. That was more than you owed her, or me. You didn't have to do that. I know I didn't have to, she said. That's not why I do things. He had nothing to say to that. There was nothing to say. He sat with the truth of it, the plain, undecorated truth of who she was, which had always been exactly what it appeared to be, which he had somehow managed to understand as burden rather than foundation. His phone buzzed again. He looked at the screen. Do-hyun. Cutout found. He's talking. By X location. Confirmed 40 minutes outside Seoul. We have an address. He read the message twice. Then he looked at it for a third time, and the decision he'd been building toward since he stood on that sidewalk and called her was completing itself inside him, solidifying from possibility into certainty. The address, 40 minutes outside Seoul. A man who had spent 8 years dismantling what Jae-hyun had built, who had used grief as a tool, who had placed a weapon inside the life of a woman who had never harmed anyone, who had gotten 3 people killed, who had sent men into a building tonight to take something from Nia Okafor in a maintenance room while she stood there alone with her chin level and her eyes clear. He typed back to Do-hyun, "Don't move yet. Wait for me." Nia, beside him, had seen him reading. She said nothing. "I have to go," he said. "I'm going to bring you somewhere, and I'm going to leave Kwon and 2 others, and I have to go." She didn't ask where. She looked at the phone in his hand and the expression on his face, and she understood the shape of it without needing the details. "Come back," she said. It was not a request for his sake. It was something more complicated than that, and they both knew it, and neither of them tried to make it simpler. "Yes," he said. The car pulled up to a building that Jae-hyun had never used for anything before, a property so cleanly separated from the Kong name that only 2 people in the world knew he owned it, and one of them was Ryu. He walked Nia inside, confirmed the security arrangements with a thoroughness that he recognized was partly necessity and partly the only form of care he currently had available to offer her. At the door to the room she'd be using, she stopped and turned to face him. She looked at him the way she had in the maintenance room. The deep reading, the one that went past performance into whatever was underneath it. He stood still and let her look, because he had nothing left to hide and no energy for the effort of it anyway. "Jae-hyun," she said. "Yes." "Whatever happens tonight." She paused, and he could see her choosing her words with the same precision she brought to everything, never wasting, never performing. "Whatever happens, what you do next, make sure it's something you can live in afterward. Not be careful. Not come back safe." She was talking about something else, the kind of thing only someone who knew him as deeply as she did, as deeply as she still did, apparently, despite everything, would think to say. He held her gaze for a moment. "I know," he said. He walked back to the car. Do-hyun was waiting at the building entrance when he arrived, and the team was assembled. 8 men, contained and ready, none of them needing instruction because they had been in enough of these situations to know what a night like this looked like and what it required. "The address," Jae-hyun said. Do-hyun handed him a phone with the location pulled up. 41 minutes outside Seoul, a property registered under a corporation that took Ryu 3 layers of document tracing to connect back to anything real. Remote enough for privacy, accessible enough to not be a fortress. A man who had been so certain his timeline was intact that he had not yet had occasion to run. Jae-hyun looked at the address. He thought about 3 dead men. He thought about the document his mother would never know had been used as bait. He thought about Sabrina on the phone with a cutout after his accounts froze, the 20-minute window she'd given him to cross, the calculation she'd run on whether the operation was salvageable. He thought about Nia standing in a maintenance room in the dark, arms at her sides, chin level, giving nothing away to men who had come to take something from her. He looked up from the phone. "Let's go," he said. The cars pulled out, and the city fell away behind them as they moved toward the highway that would take them out of Seoul, and the night was very dark beyond the artificial light of the city's edges. And inside the lead car, Jae-hyun Kang sat with his hands open on his knees. Not clenched, not armored, open. Because the man he was in this moment was not the same one who had laughed in his own bedroom 2 months ago. And whatever was at the end of this 41-minute drive was going to require him to be fully. The property was a converted farmhouse 43 minutes outside Seoul, sitting on land that had been purchased through 3 corporate layers, and had no visible connection to anything or anyone that mattered. It had a gravel approach road, a main structure with lights on in 2 windows, and an outbuilding that Do-yoon's advance contact had identified as being used for equipment storage, but was almost certainly also used for people who needed to be kept somewhere without attracting attention. There was 1 man visible outside, near the main entrance, and the advance contact estimated 4 more inside based on vehicle count and the light patterns over the past 6 hours. Jae-hyun's team stopped the cars 400 meters back, where the tree line gave enough coverage, and they walked the remaining distance in 2 groups, Do-yoon taking the outbuilding approach, and Jae-hyun going straight at the main structure, with 4 men who had been in enough of these situations that they moved through darkness with the particular silence of people who have learned that noise is the difference between control and chaos. The man outside the entrance heard them when they were 8 feet away. He turned. He made a decision that Jae-hyun saw forming in his posture, the specific tensing that precedes either a fight or a shout, and one of Jae-hyun's men moved with a speed and efficiency that made the decision irrelevant before it could become action. They went through the front door. The interior was sparse, functional, stripped of anything decorative. A working space rather than a living one. Long tables, equipment Jae-hyun recognized as financial processing hardware, files in labeled folders stacked with the obsessive organization of someone who understood that their documentation was their leverage. 2 men inside looked up from what they were doing with expressions that moved through surprise and calculation and arrived, very quickly, at the recognition that neither calculation nor surprise was going to be useful to them. Do-yoon's voice came through the earpiece. Outbuilding clear. 2 men secured. That left Baek. He was in the back room. Jae-hyun found him not running, not hiding, not in the posture of someone who had been caught unprepared. I was sitting at a desk with a cup of tea, which he did not set down when Jae-hyun walked through the door, and his face had the expression of a man who had run the calculation and arrived at the conclusion that a particular kind of composure was the last dignified option available to him. Jae-hyun remembered him. That was the first thing. The jolt of recognition. 8 years is long enough to change a man's surface, add weight and lines and the particular gravity of age, but not long enough to make him unrecognizable to someone who had known him well. Baek had been a capable captain, organized and loyal for 11 years before the thing that ended it. He had been good at his job. That was what made the ending worse at the time. Not betrayal from someone incompetent, which is almost easier to absorb, but betrayal from someone you had genuinely valued. "You found the property fast," Beck said. "Faster than I expected." "Sabrina told us about the cutout," Jae-hyun said. He stayed near the door. He was not going to close the distance. Not yet. Not out of any tactical consideration, but because he wanted to be able to see all of the room from here. He talked. Beck set the cup down. "She broke faster than I expected too." He didn't sound angry. He sounded like a man reviewing a project that hadn't met its specifications. She was the weakest element. I knew that going in. These things always come down to the weakest element. "You built an operation around a woman's grief." "I built an operation around an access point," Beck said. "The grief was already there. I didn't create it." "You identified it and sent someone into it." "Yes." He looked at Jae-hyun steadily. "You want me to tell you it bothers me? It doesn't. Not the tactical decision. The 3 men. That I'd do differently, given the option. Operational necessity, but there are costs that compound. I understand that. You'd do it differently because it was a mistake, not because it was wrong. I'm not going to perform contrition for you, Jae-hyun. We've known each other too long for that." Jae-hyun looked at him. The man across the desk had spent 8 years building something. Patient, meticulous, structured. And it had come apart in 12 days because Ryu was thorough, and Sabrina had a threshold that Baek had miscalculated by a margin he hadn't expected. 8 years. That was the thing that sat in the room with a particular weight. A man who had been expelled and had chosen, rather than moving on, to dedicate the subsequent 8 years of his life to dismantling the organization that had expelled him. "What did I do?" Jae-hyun said. Beck's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. What? 8 years ago, when I expelled you. What did I do that warranted 8 years of this?" A long pause. Beck looked at the desk surface, then back up. You made a decision about me based on someone else's account without giving me the opportunity to answer it. You moved against me before I could respond, and you did it publicly, in front of every captain, every family, every person who mattered in that world. You didn't just remove me. You made sure nobody in the organization could ever work with me again. You made sure the decision was irreversible. The account I was given was accurate. The account you were given was incomplete. His voice had an edge now, the first real edge, the place where the composure was thinnest. There was context you never asked for because you'd already made your decision before you sat down to hear me out. 15 minutes, Jae-hyun. You gave me 15 minutes to answer for something I'd spent 3 years managing in a way I believed served the organization. 15 minutes, and then you made it permanent. Jae-hyun stood with that for a moment, not agreeing, not apologizing, just holding the weight of it the way you hold a thing when you're trying to understand its actual dimensions rather than the dimensions you assumed. You could have come to me, he said. After. Asked for a second hearing. I did, Beck said simply. Twice. Your people turned me away at the door. More silence. Do-hyun appeared in the doorway behind Jae-hyun, waited, read the room, stayed where he was. 3 men are dead, Jae-hyun said. Whatever the origin of this, whatever was legitimate in your grievance, 3 men are dead, and a woman who had nothing to do with any of it spent tonight in a maintenance room because you sent people there. I know. That's what this ends on. Not your grievance, not mine. That's what's in the room. Beck looked at him. The composure was entirely intact, and underneath it, visible if you knew what you were looking for, was the exhaustion of a man who has been running on a single purpose for 8 years and has just felt it run out. Not defeat exactly. Something more complicated. The specific depletion of someone who has arrived at the destination they planned for and found that the planning was the thing that was keeping them alive, and now the planning is over. What happens now? Beck said. All the material you collected, every file, every document, every financial record, it gets handed to Ryu tonight, and Ryu verifies the full inventory, and none of it goes anywhere else. And if I decline? You won't, Jae-hyun said. Because the alternative to that conversation is a different kind of conversation, and we both know what that looks like, and neither of us needs to describe it. Beck looked at him for a long moment. Then, without drama, he opened the desk drawer and removed a single USB drive and placed it on the desk surface facing Jae-hyun. Everything is encrypted on that drive, he said. Ryu will need the key. I'll give it to him directly. Not to you, not to Do-hyun. Ryu. Why Ryu? Because Ryu is the only person in your organization I've never had cause to question. A pause. That's not an insult. It's the opposite. Jae-hyun looked at the drive on the desk. He didn't pick it up yet. The copies. There's one additional copy, off-site. The location transfers to you when Ryu confirms the primary drive. And you? Beck met his eyes. I'm 63 years old. I have enough in accounts that never touched your organization to live out the rest of whatever time I have somewhere that isn't here. I'm not going to run. I'm too tired to run. What I want, the only thing I actually want at this point, is to leave this room. Jae-hyun picked up the drive. He stood there holding it, this small thing that represented 8 years of someone's purpose, and the last 2 months of crisis and 3 funerals and a maintenance room and a phone call on a sidewalk that he'd almost made too late. The men who came tonight, he said, the ones who went into that building, they knew what they were going in for. Yes. They hurt one of my people. I know. That's not something I can let sit without consequence. I understand. Beck's voice was steady. That's separate from the conversation we just had. I understand the distinction. Hyun handed the drive to Do-hyun without looking away from Beck. He gave 3 quiet instructions. Do-hyun nodded and stepped back. You'll make the call to Ryu in the next hour, Jae-hyun said. After that, whatever arrangements you've made for yourself, you execute them. You leave. You don't come back into anything connected to me or anyone connected to me. Not in a year, not in 10 years. Agreed. And Beck, he held the older man's gaze. For what it's worth, and I understand it's not worth much at this point, if what you've described about 8 years ago is accurate, then I made a decision that didn't have enough information in it. I'm not apologizing for the outcome. I'm acknowledging the process was wrong. Beck looked at him for a long time. His expression didn't soften exactly, but something in it changed, a slight release of something that had been held rigid for a very long time. That's the first honest thing you've said to me since 2016, he said. I'll take it. Jae-hyun walked out of the room. He walked through the main space where Do-yoon's men were managing the dismantling of 8 years of operational infrastructure with the efficient thoroughness that Ryu would later describe as exceptionally clean work. He walked through the front door and into the cold night air, and he stood on the gravel outside the farmhouse and breathed the air that smelled like earth and distance and the absence of the city, and he let himself, for exactly as long as it took to take 3 slow breaths, be simply a person standing in the dark with the full weight of everything he'd done and failed to do settling around him like weather. Then he called Do-yoon out and gave the remaining instructions, and he got in the car and he went back toward Seoul. Ryu received the call from Baek at 1:14 in the morning. He called Jae-hyun at 2:40 to confirm the encryption key was valid and the drive's contents matched the inventory Baek had provided. The offsite copy location transferred at 3:15. By 4:00 in the morning, the material that had been assembled over 8 years to destroy the Kong organization was inside Ryu's possession and going nowhere. Jae-hyun was still awake when the final confirmation came through. He was sitting in the rooms adjacent to where Nia was sleeping. She had been asleep when he returned, and he had told Kwon not to wake her, and he had sat in the outer room with the confirmation messages coming through his phone one by one, and he had let her sleep because she had earned it several times over. At some point, somewhere around 5 in the morning, he fell asleep in the chair. He woke up to the sound of movement from the other room and early light coming through the window, and Nia appeared in the doorway with her hair undone and her face in the unguarded state of someone who has just woken up and not yet applied any layer of presentation. And she looked at him in the chair and at the phone in his hand and at the fact that he was still wearing yesterday's clothes, and she said, "It's done?" "It's done." She nodded once. She went to the small kitchen and came back with 2 cups of coffee, and she handed him one and sat down across from him, and they drank their coffee in the early morning light without saying anything for a while. And it was the most honest thing that had happened between them in years. "Tell me," she said, when the coffee was half gone. He told her. All of it this time. The full version he'd promised. No managed edges, no selective disclosure. Baek, the 8-year operation, the financial extraction, the 3 informants and how they died, the way Sabrina had been recruited before she ever made contact with Nia, the phone call 2 years before she arrived in Seoul, when someone had looked at Nia Okafor's grief and decided it was an entry point. Nia listened the way she always listened, completely, without interruption, with the quality of attention that made people feel simultaneously seen and slightly exposed. Her face moved through things as he spoke. Not performance, actual movement, a tightening around the eyes when he described the recruitment, a stillness so complete it was almost held breath when he got to the informant's names, a brief compression of her lips when he reached the part about her mother's property documents being the final target. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "She called me 2 weeks before I left for Seoul," Nia said finally. "The first time. I mean, the very first contact, the real beginning of us getting close again. It was 2 weeks after my mother died. She called and she cried with me for an hour on the phone. I thought..." She stopped. "I thought it was grief. I thought she was grieving too." "She may have been," Jae-hyun said. "People are more than one thing." Nia looked at him. "That's a generous reading." "It's an accurate one. It doesn't change what she did." She looked down at the cup in her hands. "I keep trying to find the moment where I should have seen it, where the sign was clear enough that I had no excuse." A pause. "There isn't one. Or maybe there are 100, and they all required me to be suspicious of the one person I'd decided to trust. And I couldn't be that person. I didn't want to be that person." "You shouldn't have to be that person," he said. "That's not a failure on your part. Someone built an operation specifically designed to exploit the fact that you trust people. The failure belongs to the people who designed it. And to you." She said it without cruelty. Flatly. Informational. "You created the conditions, the loneliness, the distance. You gave her easy access because I was filling the absence you left." "Yes," he said. No qualification, no defense. "Yes, I did." She looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression acknowledged the directness of it, Not with warmth, not yet, but with a kind of recognition. That's the first time you've said that without a but attached to it. I'm working on the buts. She almost smiled, not quite, but the specific tension around her mouth softened by 1 degree. What happens now to Sabrina? That's not my decision. She looked at him with surprise she didn't hide. Since when? Since she's your family. What was done to her before she became what she became, the recruitment, the way they used your mother's death to reach her, that happened to her too. She made choices inside that. Choices that cost people their lives. I'm not minimizing that. But the beginning of it happened to her, and you're the only person in this who gets to decide what that means going forward. Nia was quiet for a long time. I don't want to see her, she said. Not for a long time. Maybe not ever. But I don't want her destroyed. Then she won't be. You can guarantee that? In the ways that matter, yes. She nodded slowly, drank the last of her coffee, set the cup down and sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment with the expression of someone who is doing the arithmetic of damage, adding up what was lost, what was spent, what can and cannot be recovered. I need to go back to my apartment, she said. Today. I know. I need to go back to my actual life. The center. The kids who were expecting me yesterday. I'll have someone drive you. I don't need... Someone will drive you, he said, and will be present in the building for the next week. Not visible, not intrusive, just present. After that, the situation is contained enough that it won't be necessary. She considered pushing back. He could see it. The specific quality of her considering whether this was him managing or him caring, and deciding which version she was willing to accept. 1 week, she said. 1 week. She stood up. He stood up too, which surprised her slightly. She stopped, looked at him, and there was a moment where they were both standing in a small room in the early morning with everything that had happened between them and around them, and because of them hanging in the air, and neither of them tried to collapse it into something simpler than it was. Jae-hyun, she said. Yes. The papers are still filed. I know. I'm not withdrawing them. I know that too. She looked at him steadily. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I know. I'm saying it because I need you to understand that what happened last night, what you did, moving me, coming yourself, the conversation with Bayek, none of that changes the fundamental thing, the thing I heard in that hallway. It doesn't, he said. It shouldn't. She absorbed that. The fact that he didn't argue, the fact that he stood in the acknowledgement of it, rather than trying to redirect toward what came after. People keep telling me, she said, that time changes things, that people are capable of becoming different people. What do you think? I think people are capable of becoming slightly different versions of who they already were. I think genuine change is rarer than people claim it is, and slower than people want it to be. She held his gaze. I think the question is never whether someone is capable of change. It's whether you're willing to wait out the time it actually takes to see if the change is real. And are you? She looked at him for a long moment, and he stood very still and let her look, and he did not try to answer the question for her or soften the waiting. I don't know yet, she said. That's honest. That's enough, he said. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. At the door she paused and turned back once, and she looked at him one more time with the deep reading, the one that went all the way through. Eat something, she said. You look terrible. She left. He stood in the empty room for a while after the sound of her footsteps faded, and what moved through him was not hope exactly. Hope was too light a word for something that had this much weight in it. It was something more like the first breath after being underwater. The recognition that the surface exists and that you are moving toward it, and that the distance is real but not infinite. He sat back down in the chair. He called his mother. She answered immediately, which meant she had not slept either, which meant she had been waiting. It's over, he said. You can go home when you're ready. I'll arrange the transport. Nia, she said. The name before anything else. Before asking about him, or the operation, or the 8-year threat that had spent a night dismantling and was now resolved. She's safe. She's going back to her apartment. A sound from his mother that was not quite exhale and not quite word. And between you? I don't know yet. Good, she said. He blinked. Good? The honest answer is always good. The easy answer is what concerns me. A pause. He could hear her adjusting in whatever chair or bed she'd spent the night in, the small sounds of an old woman settling. She called me again last night, while all this was happening. Nia called you? She knew I'd been moved and she was worried about me. She called from wherever she was, and she talked to me for 20 minutes about nothing, about the children at her work, about a recipe she's been trying to get right, about whether the city feels different in autumn or whether she's imagining it. His mother's voice was steady and completely serious. 20 minutes, Hyun, while your men were managing a crisis that involved her directly. She kept me company so I wouldn't sit alone in an unfamiliar place being frightened. He sat very still. That woman, his mother said. And then she stopped, and he heard her breathe. And when she spoke again, her voice had that quality it only had when she had decided to say the most true thing she knew. That woman has spent 7 years loving the idea of who you could be. It would be a shame beyond description if you spent the rest of your life proving her right only after you've already lost her. I'm not sure I've lost her. Then act like it, not for her, for the man you're trying to become. He ended the call and sat in the quiet room, and he let his mother's words sit where they had landed, which was somewhere deep and load-bearing, the kind of place where words go when they are true enough to restructure something. The weeks that followed were quiet in the way that aftermath is always quiet. Not peaceful, not resolved, but stripped of the immediate noise of crisis, leaving behind only the damage to be assessed and the work to be done. Do-yoon managed the final dismantling of Bayek's operation with the thoroughness that characterized everything he touched. Ryu spent 3 weeks going through the recovered files and confirming that the material had not been copied or distributed beyond what they already knew about. Sabrina was moved out of Seoul, not forcibly, not with threat, but with enough clarity about the situation that the choice to leave was effectively made for her. Chae-hyun did not communicate with her directly. He had said what there was to say in the apartment that last night, and adding to it would serve no purpose. The divorce proceedings, which had been delayed by Shin's procedural maneuvering, were now allowed to move forward at their natural pace. Jae-hyun called Shin and rescinded the delay instructions. "Let it process," he said. "Don't slow anything down." Shin, who had been in the practice of family law for 22 years and had seen roughly every configuration of marital dissolution that existed, paused at this. "You're certain?" "I'm certain. The settlement terms she's requesting are minimal. She's not asking for—" "Give her whatever she's asking for," Jae-hyun said, "and then ask her attorney if there's anything additional she considered and didn't include, and offer that too." Another pause. "That's unusual. She spent 7 years in a life that cost her things." "She's never named and never asked to be compensated for," he said. "The least I can do is not make the exit difficult." He hung up. He moved out of the penthouse. Not immediately. The logistics of it took several weeks, but he began the process the day after he returned from the farmhouse, because he understood clearly that staying in that apartment was a form of refusing to acknowledge what it had become, and he was done refusing things for the sake of appearance. He found something smaller, not modest exactly. He was not performing poverty, but human in its scale, a place that required him to exist in it rather than manage it. He kept Myungja's medical arrangements and added a second person to her support team. He did not tell her he'd done this. She found out through the new person introducing herself, and she called him with the particular tone she used when she was going to complain about something she was actually grateful for. "I don't need 2 people," she said. "Humor me," he said. "I'll humor you until I don't feel like it anymore." "That's all I'm asking." He began attending the Thursday captain meetings differently. Not dramatically. There was no announcement, no visible shift in structure. But where he had previously run those meetings with the absolute authority of someone who had decided the direction before entering the room, he began asking different questions. What are we actually building here? What does this cost the people it costs? He did not become someone his captains didn't recognize. He remained who he was. But the thing underneath who he was, the thing that had been directing the choices without being examined, that thing was changing, slowly, in the way that the most real changes always happen, without ceremony, without an audience. He found out about Nia's nonprofit work the way he had found out about most true things, too late and through someone else. Do-hyun mentioned it obliquely in the context of something operational, and Jae-hyun stopped him and asked him to say it again because the organization Do-hyun had named was one that provided legal assistance to families affected by organized crime. By organized crime. He sat with that for a long time. The image of Nia, for years, quietly directing resources and intelligence toward the people his world had damaged, doing it without telling him, without asking his permission, without making it a conversation because she had understood correctly that it would have been a conversation he wasn't ready to have. She had done the work because the work mattered, and not because anyone was watching. He began making anonymous donations to the organization's operating fund the following month. He did not tell Nia. He did not intend to. That was not the point. He visited the families of the 3 dead informants, not all at once, separately, over several weeks, with no announcement and no delegation. He went alone. He brought nothing except himself and the truth, which was that the men had served with genuine courage, and that their deaths were a consequence of a failure in his organization that he carried. He did not offer money in those first visits. Money later, and carefully, and after enough time had passed that it could not be mistaken for conscience purchase. In those first visits, he just sat with people in their grief and let them say what they needed to say, and did not defend himself or manage the conversation toward a conclusion that made him feel better. It was the hardest thing he did in those months, harder than the farmhouse, harder than the conversation with Bayek. Sitting with people who had every right to their anger and offering them nothing except his presence and the acknowledgement that their loss was real and not incidental. He thought about Nia a great deal during those weeks, not with the consuming quality of the early divorce period, when thinking about her had been tangled up in pride and pain and the noise of what he'd lost. More quietly now. More specifically, he would be in a meeting or a car or standing at the window of the new apartment, and he would think of something she'd said, something from years ago, or something from that morning in the small room over coffee. And he would hold it and look at it and understand it differently than he had when it was first spoken. He did not contact her during those weeks. He had told her he would give her time, and he understood clearly that telling someone you'll give them time and then filling that time with contact is not giving them time. It's just a slower form of the same pressure. He gave her actual time, the real kind, the uncomfortable kind, where you don't know what's happening on the other end, and you have to tolerate that not knowing. He found it harder than expected. He was not a patient man by nature. He had built his life around control and information and the ability to know the state of every moving piece. Sitting with the not knowing about the one person who mattered most to him was a specific exercise in humility that had no tactical dimension and offered no strategic benefit, and was simply, plainly, the right thing. He did it anyway. Myungja called him on a Thursday in February, 4 months after the night at the farmhouse, 5 months after the divorce papers, and told him, with the directness that was the primary feature of her love, that she had been having lunch with Nia regularly for the past 2 months, and that he should know this not because it concerned him, but because secrets between family members had already done enough damage, and she was not going to participate in another one. He thanked her. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just continue becoming the person you should have been 8 years ago." "I'm working on it." "Work faster," she said, and ended the call. It was Nia who reached out, in the end. In March, 6 months after everything, a message that arrived on a Tuesday morning while he was in a meeting and that he didn't see until he stepped out at noon. It said, "I'm going to be at the center Thursday evening. They're having something, a fundraiser, small, informal. Your mother is coming. I thought you should know, in case you wanted to decide whether to come or not." Not an invitation, not a rejection, the exact shape of a door held open without anyone pushing it either direction. He replied at noon, "What time?" She replied at 7. He arrived at 6:50. Not to be early in a conspicuous way, but because he could not make himself wait until 7. The community center was a converted ground floor space in a neighborhood that was not wealthy and not poor, the kind of neighborhood that gets things done because it has to. Inside, the space was fuller than he'd expected. Tables, people, children running with the specific uncontainable energy of kids who have been told to behave in a setting and have heard the word behave without absorbing its operational implications. He stood near the entrance for a moment and looked at the room. He saw Nia before she saw him. She was crouched beside a small boy, maybe 7 years old, who was showing her something on a piece of paper with the urgent expressiveness of a child who needs you to understand that this drawing is the most important thing anyone has ever produced. She was looking at it with her full attention, Not the performed attention of an adult tolerating a child's exhibition, but the real kind, leaning in, asking what appeared to be an actual question about the content of the drawing. The boy answered with great seriousness. She answered back. The boy nodded, satisfied that he had been understood, and ran off to show the drawing to someone else. And Nia straightened and turned and saw Jae-hyun standing near the door. She looked at him. He looked at her. The room continued around them. Noise, movement, the particular warm chaos of people who are there for something that matters to them. And neither of them moved for a moment. Then she walked toward him, and he walked toward her, and they met somewhere in the middle of the room. "You came," she said. "You told me what time," he said. Something moved in her expression. Not a smile yet, but its precursor. The slight change in the quality of her eyes that happened when she found something genuinely true. "Your mother is in the back," she said. "She's been here for an hour already. She reorganized the dessert table." "Of course she did. I didn't stop her." "Nobody stops her." A pause. They were standing close enough that he could see the slight tiredness around her eyes that meant she'd been working hard recently. The kind of tired that comes from doing work that is genuinely difficult rather than work that is merely consuming. She was wearing a dark green dress he didn't recognize, which meant she'd bought it in the months he hadn't seen her, which meant there was a version of her life during those months that he had no access to and no claim on, and he found that he did not resent this but held it with something more like respect. "You look well," he said. "I am well," she said. And then, with the directness that had always been the most recognizable feature of who she was, "Better than I expected to be," which is its own kind of surprising. "You rebuilt fast." "I rebuilt carefully," she corrected. "Fast and carefully aren't the same thing." He nodded. "No, they're not." Around them, the room moved in its warm chaos, and Myung-ja appeared from the back, with the expression of someone who has spotted something she's been waiting for and is going to pretend she hasn't, and Jae-hyun watched his mother cross the room toward them with the dignity of a woman who has survived everything. Life has sent her and has arrived at the far end of it with her standards entirely intact. She reached them. She looked at her son with the appraising clarity she had been looking at him with for his entire life. Then she looked at Nia. Then she said, to no one in particular, and both of them at once, "The dessert table is better now." "I'm sure it is," Nia said. "The arrangement was chaotic," Myung-ja said. "Chaos at the dessert table affects the mood of the entire room. People don't understand this." "You should tell them," Jae-hyun said. "I already did," she said, and went to get herself a cup of tea. Nia watched her go with a softness in her expression that was uncomplicated and real. "She reorganized the dessert table at my nonprofit fundraiser, and I will never tell her she can't come back," she said. "Nobody tells her she can't come back." "I know." They stood together in the middle of the room for a while, not adjacent to the wall, not near the exit, but in the actual middle of the space where the light was brightest and the noise was loudest, and the children were in the most concentrated chaos. It was not comfortable exactly. There was too much history in the air between them for comfort, but it was something real, something that had not been performed or managed into existence, but had arrived through months of actual work, and actual cost, and actual change. He had not asked her anything tonight. He was not going to. The shape of the door she had opened with that Tuesday message was clear enough to him, and walking through it required patience, and he had been practicing patience. But at some point during the evening, after his mother had gotten into an absorbing conversation with a woman who ran the legal assistance program and was explaining why the case intake process was inefficient and could be improved, after Jae-hyun had talked for 40 minutes with a former gang member who now worked for the center's youth mentorship program, and who had questions about financial management that Jae-hyun answered with a directness that surprised them both. Nia found him near the window and stood beside him and looked out at the street the way you look at something when you're really thinking about something else. "I've been told," she'd said, "by several people whose opinion I respect, that what you've been doing these past months is real." "What have you been told?" "The families, the donations." "Yes, Ryu told your mother, and your mother tells me everything. You should know this about your mother by now. The changes in how you run things." She paused. "I don't take other people's testimony about someone's character as the final word. I'm not built that way." "I know. But it's information." "What would be the final word?" he said. "For you." She looked at the street for a moment. Time, she said. There's no shortcut to it. It has to be enough time that the change is unremarkable, not impressive anymore, just the way you are. The version of you that you became in a crisis is not the version I need to evaluate. Anyone can be their best self in a crisis. It's the ordinary days that tell the truth. That's a long process. Yes, she said. It is. Are you willing to watch it from where you are? She turned to look at him. In the window's reflected light and the warm interior light of the room, she looked exactly like herself. Not younger, not softer, not the way memory sentimentalizes people, but the actual specific person she was, with the tiredness around her eyes, and the green dress he'd never seen, and the expression that was always, when it was most honest, slightly beyond what he could fully read. I'm here tonight, she said. That's where I am. That's enough, he said. For the second time he'd said those words to her, and this time she heard them differently, and he could see that she did. The evening ended the way evenings like this end, gradually, with coats being retrieved and children being collected, and the particular warm noise of a room emptying slowly, rather than all at once. Myungja was the last to leave the dessert table, because she had found a structural issue with the way the napkins were folded and was resolving it. Jae-hyun said goodbye to her first, and she held his arm for a moment before he went, just his arm, and she looked at him with everything she had always known and everything she had watched him spend these months learning, and she didn't say anything because it didn't need to be said. He found Nia near the door. She was putting on her coat and talking to the center director, a compact woman named Soo-ji, who had clearly been running hard all evening and was visibly both exhausted and satisfied. He waited until the conversation ended naturally, and Soo-ji moved away. I'll walk out, he said. Kwon isn't... I sent him home 2 weeks ago, he said. The situation is contained. He's done. She looked at him. You should have told me. I'm telling you now. They walked out together into the March night, which was still cold but with a different quality to the cold than the winter months. Less absolute, less certain of itself, the cold of a season losing its conviction. The street was quiet. The neighborhood's particular version of nighttime settled around them. Do you need a car? He said. I walk home, she said. I live 3 blocks from here. You've been here 3 blocks from this center the whole time. I found the apartment because of the center, she said simply. He stood on the sidewalk. She stood on the sidewalk. 3 blocks in one direction, his car in another. Between them, the months that had passed, and the things that had been broken, and the things that had been built in the breaking's aftermath, and the specific quality of 2 people who know each other too well to pretend and too honestly to perform. Nia, he said. Yes. I'm going to keep showing up to things like this, if that's acceptable. She looked at him for a moment. Is that a question or a statement? Both. She pulled her coat a little tighter against the cold, and she looked at him with the reading that went all the way through, and he stood still and let it, and she found whatever she was looking for or didn't find it and made her decision anyway. Next month, she said, the center is hosting a dinner, larger than this. Soo-ji needs people who understand finance and logistics to help with the planning. I understand finance and logistics. I know you do. She held his gaze. It would be useful to have you involved. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not the clean resolution that stories manufacture to make the cost feel worth it. Something smaller and more durable than any of those things. The specific offer of a next thing to do, a next place to show up, a next ordinary day in which the version of himself he was trying to become could simply exist without ceremony, proving itself by being unremarkable. He understood what she was offering. He understood what it was not. He understood that the distance between here and what they had once been was real, and would take real time and might never fully close. And he understood that she was telling him, in the only language she actually trusted, that she was willing to watch the distance. Tell me when you need me there, he said. I will, she said. She turned and walked toward her apartment, 3 blocks in the direction of the community center where she had spent the past months building something clean out of the wreckage of things she hadn't chosen and things she had, and her footsteps were steady and unhurried on the pavement, and she did not look back. Not because she didn't know he was watching, but because looking back while moving forward was the specific kind of thing she had decided, somewhere in the past months, that she was done doing. He watched her until she turned the corner. Then he stood alone on the quiet street for a while, in the cold that was losing its certainty, in the city that had watched the whole of it without comment. And he was not the man who had laughed in his own bedroom and called his wife a burden, and he was not yet the man he was in the process of becoming. And between those two versions of himself was where he lived right now, in the ordinary, unremarkable daily work of it. He turned up his collar against the cold. He walked to his car. He drove home through the March Seoul night, through streets that were wet with the early beginning of something that was not quite thaw, past lights that had been on all winter and would stay on well past spring. And he thought about next month, and the dinner, and the work that needed to be done before then. He thought about ordinary days. He was beginning, at last, to understand that they were the point.